The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Astoria ballroom dripped light onto the assembly below, a constellation of human stars in a universe of black ties and silk gowns. It was a gilded cage where reputations were traded like currency. And Ilara Vance, for the first time in her life, felt she finally owned a piece of it. She stood near the stage, the fabric of her emerald dress a cool caress against her skin, a tangible symbol of the world she had conquered. The cloying scent of expensive perfume mixed with the metallic tang of ambition, an aroma she had learned to associate with success. Tonight was her coronation, the culmination of a decade spent clawing her way from the grime of the foster care system to the polished mahogany of the boardroom. As Chief Operating Officer of the Croft Foundation, one of the nation's most prestigious philanthropic organizations, she had orchestrated global initiatives that had saved thousands of lives. And tonight, she was to receive the Vanguard Award for Humanitarian Excellence. It was more than an award. It was a validation, a final, definitive seal on the life she had painstakingly built, a life where the ghosts of her past could no longer reach her. Her mentor, the Foundation's founder and CEO, Julian Croft, moved through the crowd with the effortless grace of a man born to power. He was handsome in a way that seemed almost classical, his silver-streaked hair and kind eyes a portrait of dignified benevolence. He had found her 10 years ago, a raw, fiercely intelligent young woman with a scholarship and a mountain of debt, and had seen not her rough edges, but her brilliant, strategic mind. He had molded her, guided her, and trusted her. He was the closest thing she had ever had to a father. He caught her eye and gave her a warm, paternal smile. "Ready for your moment, Ilara." "I think the moment should be more worried about being ready for me," she replied, her own smile calm and confident. It was their private joke, a nod to the relentless drive he had so admired in her. "That's my girl," he said, squeezing her shoulder before making his way to the stage. The ballroom quieted. 1,000 pairs of eyes, belonging to senators, CEOs, and socialites, turned toward the podium. The soft glow of the stage lights felt like a benediction. Ilara took a slow, steadying breath, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle in her dress. This was it. The little girl who read library books by flashlight in a crowded group home was about to be honored in front of the world. "Good evening." Julian's voice, rich and resonant, filled the hall. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate progress, to honor innovation, and to recognize those who dedicate their lives to a brighter future. For 10 years, the Croft Foundation has been a beacon of hope, and, at my side, helping to guide its light, has been a truly remarkable woman, Ilara Vance." A wave of applause, polite yet genuine, washed over her. Ilara inclined her head, a practiced gesture of humility. On the large screens flanking the stage, a photo of her appeared smiling, professional, poised. "Ilara came to us from a background few in this room could imagine," Julian continued. His tone was warm, laudatory. "She has shown us that brilliance is not a matter of pedigree, but of passion. As our COO, she has managed a budget of billions with unparalleled skill, launching programs that have redefined modern philanthropy. She is the mind behind our success, the heart of our mission." He paused, letting the praise settle. This was the setup, the preamble to her name being called. She felt a familiar knot of emotion in her chest, not pride. Exactly. But a deep, quiet satisfaction. She had earned this. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, had led to this perfect, crystalline moment. Julian's expression shifted. The warm smile faded, replaced by a look of profound, theatrical sadness. "Which is why it is with the heaviest of hearts," he said, his voice cracking just so, "that I must do this. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Alara's smile faltered. On stage, Julian's sorrowful gaze hardened into something cold. Something she had never seen before. "The Vanguard Award is meant to honor integrity," he said, his voice now laced with steel. "And integrity is a quality Ms. Vance, it seems, sorely lacks." The air in the ballroom turned to ice. The murmur died, replaced by a stunned, collective silence. Cameras that had been idle now flashed with predatory hunger. Alara felt 1,000 eyes pivot to her, their gazes no longer admiring but sharp, analytical, hungry for scandal. Her heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. "An internal audit, completed just this morning, has uncovered a staggering betrayal," Julian announced, his voice ringing with righteous indignation. "Over the past 2 years, more than $20 million have been systematically embezzled from our relief funds. Funds meant for disaster victims, for starving children, have been funneled into offshore accounts." He gestured to the screens. Her professional headshot was replaced by a complex web of financial charts, arrows pointing from the foundation's accounts to a network of shell corporations. And, finally, to a single account in the Cayman Islands. Underneath the account number, in stark, damning letters, was her name, Alara Vance. A collective gasp swept the room. It was a lie. A monstrous, impossible lie. Her mind, usually a fortress of logic and control, felt fractured. She looked at Julian, searching for some sign, some explanation, but his face was a mask of cold resolve. "The evidence is irrefutable, and it is devastating," he said. He looked directly at her then, his eyes devoid of warmth, of history, of the decade of trust they had built. "You took advantage of my trust. You took advantage of the most vulnerable people in the world. You are a disgrace to this foundation and everything it stands for. Alara Vance, you are fired, and you can be certain that the authorities have already been notified." The final words struck her with the force of a physical blow. But it wasn't the accusation, or the public humiliation, or even the betrayal that broke through her shock. It was a phrase he had used, "took advantage of my trust." The words echoed, not in the acoustics of the ballroom, but in the hollows of her memory. They twisted and morphed into a different voice, a man's harsh whisper from a lifetime ago, a foster father, his breath sour with liquor, his shadow falling over her small bed. "You think you're so smart, but you're just trash, taking advantage of our good nature." The memory, long suppressed, surfaced with agonizing clarity. The feeling of helplessness, of being small and powerless and utterly alone. The world around her seemed to warp, the glittering chandeliers blurring into the single, bare bulb of that long-forgotten bedroom. But she was not that little girl anymore. As security guards began to move toward her, their faces grim, Alara did something no one expected. She did not cry. She did not protest. She did not collapse. Instead, she straightened her spine. The tremor in her hand stilled. She met Julian's gaze across the sea of shocked faces, and a calm so profound, so unnerving it was almost terrifying, settled over her. She lifted her chin, her expression a blank slate of control. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. She would not give this ravenous crowd the drama they craved. She turned before the guards could reach her and began to walk toward the exit. Her steps were even, her pace unhurried. The sound of her heels on the marble floor was the only noise in the cavernous, silent room. It was a walk of utter defiance, a declaration that even in the wreckage of her life, she was still in command of herself. As she reached the grand double doors, she paused for a fraction of a second, not looking back, and then pushed them open and stepped out into the cold night, leaving the ruins of her life behind her. The battle had just begun. The world Alara had built vanished in the space of a single news cycle, before she had even reached the sterile anonymity of a downtown hotel room, paid for with the last of the emergency cash she kept hidden in her purse. Her face was everywhere. Her name, once synonymous with philanthropic brilliance, was now irrevocably linked to words like fraud, embezzlement, and betrayal. The setup had been flawless, a masterpiece of strategic destruction. Her work email was locked, her personal accounts, frozen by a court order Julian must have had waiting, were inaccessible. Her credit cards were declined when she tried to buy a bottle of water from a vending machine. The keycard to her penthouse apartment, a glass box in the sky she had once called home, no longer worked. The doorman, a man who had greeted her by name every morning for 5 years, looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt, barring her entry. She was an exile in her own city. For 48 hours, she remained in the small, beige hotel room, the television a constant, murmuring torment. Pundits dissected her life, her meteoric rise now reframed as a calculated infiltration. Former colleagues, people she had mentored and championed, gave carefully worded statements, expressing their shock and disappointment. The narrative was set, the concrete of public opinion hardening around her. Julian, in carefully orchestrated interviews, played the part of the heartbroken mentor, his voice heavy with sorrow, as he spoke of his profound sense of personal failure for not seeing the darkness within her. It was in that sterile room, under the hum of fluorescent lights, that the shock finally receded, replaced by the cold, clear fury that had fueled her entire life. This was not just a corporate backstabbing. This was a demolition. It was too precise, too personal. The fabricated evidence, the timing of the audit, the trigger phrase that had dredged up her deepest trauma, it was all too perfectly designed. This wasn't about money. This was about annihilation. On the third day, she turned off the television, showered, and dressed in the simple black slacks and sweater she'd bought with her cash. Her emerald gala gown lay in a heap in the corner, a relic from a dead life. She looked at her reflection in the cheap mirror. The woman looking back was not the COO of the Croft Foundation. She was someone older, harder, someone she recognized from a long time ago. She was a survivor, and survivors don't mourn. They plan. Her first call was to the one person in the city she knew who thrived on the kind of chaos that had just consumed her life. Ben Carter was a journalist of the old school, a cynical, chain-smoking bloodhound who believed that every great fortune hid a great crime. He had been trying to dig up dirt on the Croft Foundation for years, convinced that its pristine image was a facade. He had hounded Alara for interviews, for comments, for leaks, and she had coolly rebuffed him every time. Now, she was his perfect source. She met him in a dimly lit diner on the far west side, a place that smelled of stale coffee and grease. Ben slid into the booth opposite her, his trench coat shedding rainwater onto the vinyl seat. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned her face, looking for cracks. "Quite a fall from grace, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low rasp. "One day you're saving the world. The next, you're the villain of the year. You here to give me your tearful confession? I'm here to give you the story you've been hunting for your entire career," Alara said, her voice even and calm. She pushed a disposable phone across the table. "That's my new number. If you want to help me, you'll use it. If not, I'll find someone who will." Ben picked up the phone, turning it over in his hands. "Help you do what? Write a puff piece about how you were misunderstood. Help me burn Julian Croft to the ground, she stated, without a hint of melodrama. He framed me. I don't know why yet. But I will find out. And when I do, I'm going to dismantle his life, his reputation, and his empire, piece by piece. You can either have a front row seat and the exclusive story, or you can read about it with everyone else. He stared at her for a long moment, the cynicism in his eyes warring with the instinct of a journalist sniffing out the story of a lifetime. He's got an army of lawyers, a PR team that could spin a hurricane into a light breeze, and the entire city in his pocket. You have, what, $100 and a grudge? I have the truth, Alara said. And I have a better understanding of how power works than Julian ever will. He was born into it. I had to build it from nothing. I know where all the weaknesses are, because I'm the one who fortified them for him. A slow smile spread across Ben's face. He pocketed the phone. All right, Vance, you've got my attention. Where do we start? The first obstacle was survival. With no money and no home, she was vulnerable. But her childhood had been a masterclass in living in the margins. She retrieved a duffel bag from a long-term storage unit she'd kept since college, a paranoid contingency from a life where stability was never guaranteed. Inside were several $1,000s in cash, fake IDs, and a set of clothes that would allow her to blend into any crowd. She found a small, month-to-month apartment in a neighborhood where no one knew or cared about the scandals of the elite. It was a world away from her penthouse, but it was safe. It was a base of operations. From this new, anonymous life, the war began. Alara worked from a library computer, using encrypted networks and public Wi-Fi to mask her digital footprint. She became a ghost in the system she had once commanded. Her first target was not Julian, but his inner circle, the pillars that held up his empire. Her first move was against Arthur Kendrick, the Foundation's chairman of the board and Julian's oldest friend. Alara knew Arthur's secrets because she had helped him hide them. He was a man who projected an image of stern morality, but he had a gambling addiction that had nearly bankrupted him 3 years prior. Julian had quietly bailed him out with an undocumented loan from a discretionary fund, a fund Alara herself had structured. She didn't need to blackmail him. Blackmail was crude and left a trail. Instead, she orchestrated a leak, an anonymous tip, sent from a public computer to a financial blogger Ben knew, suggested irregularities in Kendrick's personal finances. The blogger started digging. Within a week, whispers about Kendrick's gambling debts began to circulate. His creditors, who had been patient as long as he was tethered to the Croft fortune, grew nervous. They called in their markers. Panicked, Kendrick went to Julian for help. But Julian, now under intense scrutiny himself, couldn't risk another bailout. Alara's move had been perfectly timed. She had isolated Kendrick, forcing Julian to choose between saving his friend and protecting himself. Julian chose himself. 2 weeks after the gala, Arthur Kendrick quietly resigned from the board, citing health reasons. He sold his shares in the Croft conglomerate at a loss to cover his debts. The first pillar had crumbled. Next was Maria Flores, the Foundation's head of public relations, the woman currently orchestrating the smear campaign against Alara. Maria was a master of narrative, but her own story had a fatal flaw. Alara knew that Maria's prestigious communications degree was a lie. She had dropped out of college 2 credits short of graduating, but had doctored her transcripts. It was a small secret, but in a world built on credentials and reputation, it was everything. Again, no direct contact. Alara created an anonymous email account and sent a single, cryptic message to the university's registrar, posing as a fact-checker from a fictitious awards committee. The subject line read, "Verification for Maria Flores, Alumna of the Year. It was enough to trigger an internal review. 3 days later, Ben Carter, acting on a tip from Alara, called the university for a comment on an unrelated story. While on the phone, he casually asked to confirm Maria's graduation year. The registrar, flustered by the ongoing internal inquiry, let it slip that there was a discrepancy in her record. Ben had his story. It was a minor piece in a gossip column, but it was a seed of doubt. The woman spinning lies for Julian Croft had built her own career on one, Julian, valuing image above all else. Couldn't afford to be represented by a fraud. Maria was quietly let go, her severance package contingent on a strict non-disclosure agreement. The second pillar was gone. With each move, Alara grew bolder, her strategy more intricate. She operated from the shadows, a puppeteer pulling strings no one else could see. She and Ben communicated only through encrypted apps and burner phones, meeting in places where the city's powerful never ventured. "You're playing chess while they're all playing checkers," Ben said one evening, watching her map out Julian's network on a large corkboard in her sparse apartment. Lines of yarn connected photos and names, a web of influence and vulnerability. "Julian taught me the game," Alara replied, her eyes fixed on a picture of her former mentor. "He just never imagined I'd be playing against him." But the central question remained. Why? Why would Julian orchestrate such a complete and vicious destruction of the person he had called his greatest success? It wasn't about money. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country. It wasn't about a simple power play. He already had all the power. The motive had to be something deeper, something intensely personal. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Ben was digging into Julian's past, looking for any skeletons. He found something, not on Julian, but on his family. A small, digitized newspaper article from a local paper in upstate New York, dated 25 years ago. The headline was tragic but unremarkable. "Local girl dies in accidental fall." He sent the article to Alara without comment. She opened the file, her eyes scanning the faded text. The story was about a 12-year-old girl who had fallen from a treehouse in the woods behind her family's summer home. Her name was Lily Croft. Alara's breath hitched. She remembered Lily, a sweet, quiet girl with bright, curious eyes. Julian's younger sister. They had been friends, inseparable during the one summer Alara had been placed in a foster home near the Crofts' estate. Then, she read the final paragraph of the article. It named the other child who had been present at the scene, a ward of the state who had been playing with Lily at the time of the accident. The name hit Alara with the force of a physical blow, sucking the air from her lungs. Alara Vance. The corkboard, the strategic plans, the revenge, it all faded into a roaring silence in her ears. The memories she had buried under decades of ambition and survival came rushing back. The scent of pine needles, the warmth of the summer sun, the sound of Lily's laughter, followed by a sickening crack. Her own small hands, too slow to catch her friend. The look on a teenage Julian's face when he found them, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, all directed at her. She had been moved to a different foster home the next day. The official investigation had ruled the death a tragic accident. She had convinced herself that everyone, including the Crofts, had accepted that. But they hadn't. Julian's mentorship, his kindness, his pride in her, it had all been a lie. A 25-year lie. He hadn't been building her up. He had been building a pedestal, a high and glittering place from which to throw her down. He wasn't punishing her for a crime she didn't commit. He was punishing her for one he was convinced she had. This wasn't about business. It was about revenge. A long, cold, and patient revenge. And Alara, staring at her own name in the faded newsprint. Finally understood that, to defeat her enemy, she would have to unravel the deepest tragedy of her own past. The revelation landed like a stone in the placid waters of Alara's strategic mind, sending ripples of understanding and horror outward. Every kind word from Julian, every promotion, every gesture of trust, was now recast in a sinister new light. His mentorship hadn't been an act of generosity. It had been an act of cultivation. He had been tending to her life like a gardener, waiting for the perfect moment to poison the roots. He wanted her to have everything so he could enjoy taking it all away. A twisted echo of the life his sister had lost. The fight was no longer just for her reputation. It was for the truth of a memory she had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. The grief for Lily, long buried, resurfaced, sharp and aching. But it was intertwined with a new, searing rage. Julian had weaponized his own sorrow, turning it into a tool for her destruction. "He's been playing the long game," she told Ben, her voice hollow as they sat in her small apartment, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the newspaper article. "For 25 years. He's been waiting." Ben stared at the screen, then at her. The usual cynicism was gone from his face, replaced by a grim understanding. "This is monstrous. To plan something for that long." "It's not just a plan. It's an obsession," Alara said, her mind already shifting from shock to strategy. "And an obsession is a weakness. It makes him predictable." She knew Julian would expect her to be broken by now, to have crumbled under the social and financial pressure. He wouldn't anticipate a counterattack, especially not one fueled by this newfound, deeply personal knowledge. He would believe he had won. That was her advantage. But Julian was not idle. Sensing a shift in the narrative after the resignations of Kendrick and Flores, he escalated his attacks. He began to use his immense power not just to isolate Alara, but to crush her. The first move was against Ben, an article he had been working on for months. A major exposé of a corrupt city councilman was suddenly killed by his editor. 2 days later, Ben was fired, the official reason being journalistic malpractice on a past story. A flimsy pretext that everyone knew was a lie. The councilman he was investigating was a close friend of Julian's. The message was clear: anyone who helped Alara Vance would be destroyed. Ben was shaken, but not broken. "He's trying to cut you off from the world," he said, meeting Alara in a crowded park, the only place they felt safe to talk. "He's taken my job, my platform. What's next?" What came next was more insidious. Julian began to leak details of Alara's childhood to the tabloid press. Vicious, twisted half-truths about her time in the foster system appeared. Online stories of behavioral problems, accusations of theft, hints of psychological instability. He was painting a picture of her as a damaged, untrustworthy person, a bad seed from the start. It was an attempt to retroactively justify his betrayal, to convince the world she had always been the monster he claimed she was. The most dangerous attack came a week later. Alara was returning to her apartment when she noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. A man in a dark suit sat behind the wheel, watching her building. He was still there an hour later. The next day, 2 men followed her from the library. They didn't approach her. They just made their presence known. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to make her feel hunted, to break her nerve. She knew Julian wouldn't resort to crude violence. It wasn't his style. His methods were more psychological. He wanted to push her to the edge, to make her paranoid and erratic, perhaps even to create a situation where he could have her institutionalized, claiming she was a danger to herself. The ultimate victory for him would not be her imprisonment, but her complete mental unraveling. The pressure was immense. Her allies were gone. Ben was unemployed and being watched. She was financially destitute and socially radioactive. Julian's shadow loomed over every part of the city. She was forced deeper into the shadows, abandoning her apartment for an even more anonymous room in a transient hotel on the city's industrial fringe. She stopped using public computers, communicating with Ben only through heavily encrypted messages, sent at odd hours from borrowed devices. She was truly alone, just as she had been as a child. The world was once again a hostile place, and she had only her own wits to rely on. Julian had stripped away her armor, her success, her support system, leaving her with nothing but the raw, resilient core he had never understood. He thought he was pushing her toward a cliff. He didn't realize he was backing her into her own fortress. It was in that dingy hotel room, with the sound of freight trains rattling her window, that Alara Vance planned her final gambit. She could no longer chip away at Julian's empire from the outside. She had to strike at its heart. Julian, believing her to be neutralized, was about to make his boldest move yet. The Croft Foundation was launching its new flagship project, the Lily Croft Legacy Initiative, a global charity dedicated to protecting at-risk children. The launch was to be a massive, live-streamed media event, a public relations spectacle designed to cement Julian's image as a grieving brother, turning his pain into a force for good. It was the pinnacle of his hypocrisy, and it would be the stage for his downfall. He's using his sister's memory as a shield, Alara whispered into her encrypted phone. Speaking to Ben, I'm going to use it as a sword. She had one final piece of leverage, a secret she had buried deep in the Foundation's financial architecture. It was a fail-safe she had created years ago, a complex network of digital backdoors and hidden data repositories, designed to protect the Foundation from an external hostile takeover. She had built it to protect Julian. Now, she would use it to expose him. For days, she worked feverishly, subsisting on coffee and protein bars, using a powerful laptop Ben had secured for her through a contact in the dark web. She navigated the labyrinthine servers of the Croft Foundation. She was a ghost in the machine, moving silently through the firewalls and security protocols she herself had designed. She found it all: the original, unaltered audit reports, emails between Julian and his lawyers planning her public execution, encrypted messages detailing the payments to the private investigators who were now tailing her. But she needed more than just proof of the frame-up. She needed to expose the man himself, the cold, calculating heart beneath the philanthropic veneer. She dug deeper, into Julian's personal files, his private correspondence, the digital soul of the man who had destroyed her. And there, buried in a password-protected folder labeled Legacy, she found it, a private journal, kept digitally for years. The entries were chilling. They detailed his 25-year obsession, his twisted joy in her success, his anticipation of her fall. He wrote about Lily constantly. His grief curdled into a venomous hatred for the gutter girl he blamed for her death. But then, she found something else, something that stopped her cold. In a series of entries from the weeks following Lily's death, Julian wrote about a conversation he had overheard between his father and another powerful man, a rising political figure named Marcus Thorne, who was a guest at their estate that fateful weekend. Thorne was supposed to be watching them. One entry read, "Father is furious. He said Thorne was on the phone, closing some deal, when he should have been by the lake. He left them alone for nearly an hour. If he had been there, Lily would still be alive. Father says we have to keep it quiet. Thorne is too important to our business. His negligence will remain our secret." The world tilted on its axis. Marcus Thorne. Now, Senator Marcus Thorne, one of the most powerful men in Washington. and a keynote speaker at the upcoming launch event for the Lily Croft Legacy Initiative. The accident hadn't just been an accident. It was the result of a powerful man's negligence, a secret that had been buried for a quarter of a century to protect a political career. Julian knew. He had known the whole time that another person bore a heavy responsibility for his sister's death. Yet, he had channeled all of his rage, all of his vengeful energy, onto a traumatized 10-year-old girl. His vendetta wasn't just cruel. It was a cowardly misdirection, a way to avoid confronting a truth that was far more complex and dangerous. Alara now held two bombs in her hands, one that would destroy Julian Croft, and another that could end the career of a United States Senator and trigger a national scandal. The night of the launch arrived. Alara stood across the street from the shimmering facade of the Lincoln Center, where the event was being held. She was invisible. Just another face in the crowd of onlookers. Dressed in the unassuming uniform of a catering assistant, an identity Ben's contact had procured for her, complete with a valid security pass. She looked up at the building, a temple of art and culture. Tonight, a stage for the final act of a 25-year tragedy. She had the evidence. She had the plan. But now, she also had a choice. A difficult moral choice about how much of the truth the world was ready to see. Her victory was at hand. But its shape and its consequences were now entirely, and terrifyingly, in her hands. The ballroom of the Lincoln Center was a universe of hushed reverence. The air hummed with the quiet power of the assembled guests, politicians, billionaires, and media moguls, all gathered to witness Julian Croft's magnum opus of philanthropy and personal branding. Towering banners bearing the soft, smiling face of a young Lily Croft hung from the ceiling, their gazes a silent, tragic benediction over the proceedings. The stage was bathed in a gentle blue light, a single, elegant lectern at its center. It was a scene of impeccable, somber taste. Alara moved through the catered chaos of the backstage area with quiet efficiency, a tray of champagne flutes in her hands. Her uniform black slacks, a white shirt, a black apron was her camouflage. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and simple. Plain glasses altered the familiar shape of her face. She was a ghost, utterly invisible to the very people who had once vied for her attention at events just like this one. Her heart beat a steady, controlled rhythm. Every detail of her plan had been meticulously rehearsed in her mind. Ben was outside, parked in a van half a block away, a powerful mobile hotspot broadcasting a secure network. He was her digital exfiltration, ready to upload everything to a dozen news outlets the moment she gave the signal. Inside, her target was the central audiovisual control booth at the back of the hall. She knew the layout, the security protocols, the software. She had planned enough of these events for the Foundation to navigate it in her sleep. Julian Croft took the stage to thunderous applause. He looked impeccable, his face a perfect mask of dignified grief. He began to speak, his voice resonating with carefully modulated emotion. My sister, Lily, was a light. He began. A brilliant, beautiful light extinguished far too soon. For 25 years, I have carried her memory, and I have dreamed of a way to turn my profound loss into a legacy of hope. He spoke of the new initiative, of protecting children, of building a safer world. It was a masterful performance. As he spoke, Alara made her move. She approached the two technicians in the control booth, offering them champagne with a polite, deferential smile. Compliments of Mr. Croft, she said softly. He wanted to thank you for your hard work tonight. The technicians, young and starstruck, accepted the glasses gratefully. They didn't notice the fine, colorless powder that dissolved instantly in the bubbling liquid, a powerful, fast-acting sedative she'd obtained from Ben's contact. It wouldn't harm them, but it would ensure they were deeply, peacefully asleep for the next several hours. She waited patiently in the corridor. Less than 5 minutes later, the booth went quiet. She slipped inside, gently propping the unconscious technicians in their chairs, and locked the door. The control panel, a constellation of lights and screens, glowed before her. She slid a small, encrypted USB drive into the main console. Her virus, disguised as a simple video file, uploaded in seconds, giving her complete control of the system. On stage, Julian was building to his crescendo. "This initiative is not about me," he declared. "It is about every child who deserves a chance to shine. A chance my Lily never had." In the front row, Senator Marcus Thorne watched with a solemn, approving nod. His presence was a powerful endorsement, a symbol of political and moral alignment with Julian's noble cause. "Now," Julian said, turning to the massive screen behind him, "I'd like to share with you a short film that captures the spirit of what we hope to achieve, the spirit of Lily." Alara's fingers flew across the keyboard. Julian expected a heartwarming montage. Instead, the screen flickered, and a new image appeared, the damning financial chart from the gala, showing the $20 million being funneled into the offshore account bearing Alara's name. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Julian faltered, his eyes darting to the control booth. He couldn't see her through the one-way glass. Then, the chart dissolved, replaced by a new document, an email from Julian to his legal team, dated a week before the gala. The subject line read, "Vance, the final phase." The body of the email detailed the plan to plant the fabricated evidence and coordinate with the authorities. The murmur in the room grew louder, turning into a wave of shocked whispers. Julian's face went pale. "There seems to be a technical difficulty," he stammered, his composure cracking. "There's no difficulty, Julian." Alara's voice, amplified through the ballroom sound system, was calm, clear, and cold. Every head in the room snapped toward the speakers. "This is the truth," her disembodied voice continued. On the screen, Julian's private journal entries began to appear, scrolling slowly for all to read. His decades-long obsession, his hatred, his twisted pleasure in her rise, and his anticipation of her fall. "She thinks I'm her savior." One entry read, "The little gutter girl, polished up for the world to see. They will love her. And when I take it all away, they will despise her. It will be a perfect, beautiful ruin, a monument to Lily." Gasps of horror echoed through the hall. Julian stood frozen on the stage, exposed, his carefully constructed persona disintegrating in real time. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Alara had the room in the palm of her hand. Her finger hovered over the final command. The next file in the sequence contained the evidence of Senator Thorne's negligence, Julian's journal entry, corroborated by a copy of a sworn affidavit from a former Croft family servant that Ben had managed to track down. Exposing Thorne would be the final, devastating blow. It would not only destroy a powerful man, but would also reveal the depth of Julian's cowardly hypocrisy. She looked through the glass at the audience. She saw Thorne, his face ashen, his eyes locked on the screen, a dawning terror in his expression. He knew what else might be in those journals. She saw the flashing lights of news cameras, the attendees holding up their phones, the world watching. And she made her choice. She did not play the Thorne file. Instead, the final image to appear on the screen was the faded newspaper article about Lily's death. The headline, "Local Girl Dies in Accidental Fall," was stark and tragic. A single sentence was highlighted, Also present at the scene was 10-year-old Alara Vance, a ward of the state. "You blamed a child for an accident." "Julian." Alara's voice filled the hall, now softer, laced with a profound sadness. "You spent 25 years plotting revenge against a ghost, and you destroyed lives to do it. You didn't build a legacy for your sister. You desecrated her memory with your hate." Then, the screens went dark. Silence descended upon the room, thick and absolute. The first news alert buzzed on an attendee's phone, then another, and another. A wave of digital noise spread through the ballroom as Ben unleashed the entire data package. Before Julian could even step down from the stage, the story was breaking across the globe. In the control booth, Ilara removed her USB drive. She unlocked the door and slipped out, melting back into the backstage chaos just as the first police sirens began to wail in the distance. She walked out of the building, not as a caterer, not as a ghost, but as a woman who had just reclaimed her name, her past, and her future. As she stepped into the cool night air, she didn't look back. She had made a moral choice, not for revenge, but for a more complicated form of justice. Julian was finished. As for Senator Thorne, he would spend the rest of his life knowing that she knew his secret. He would be her asset now, a powerful man forever neutralized by a truth she had chosen to hold in reserve. Her victory was not just a takedown, it was a checkmate. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Julian Croft's world imploded on a global stage. The live-streamed feed of his public disgrace became viral, replayed and analyzed on every news network. The phrase, "a perfect, beautiful ruin," trended on social media for days. A chilling epitaph for his career. He was arrested before he could even leave the Lincoln Center, escorted through a ravenous mob of reporters. His face, a haggard mask of shock. The Croft Foundation, its name now synonymous with a monstrous, long-brewing deception, collapsed within a week. The board resigned en masse. Its endowment was frozen, and its global operations shuttered to a halt. Ilara watched the aftermath from a quiet corner of a city she was slowly reclaiming. She sat in a small, sunlit apartment she'd rented under her own name. The legal fees covered by a pro bono lawyer who had taken her case after the story broke. The charges against her were dropped, and a formal apology was issued by the district attorney's office. The media, which had so eagerly condemned her, now clamored for her story, hailing her as a brilliant strategist, a symbol of resilience. She ignored their calls. Ben Carter became a star. His exclusive, first-hand account of Ilara's fight for justice won him a prestigious journalism award and a lucrative book deal. He was no longer a cynical outsider, but a celebrated truth-teller. His career resurrected from the ashes Julian had tried to leave it in. The days that followed the event were a blur of legal proceedings and news reports. Ilara provided a quiet, dignified deposition, her testimony sealing Julian's fate. He was charged with fraud, perjury, and malicious prosecution. Among other things, his high-priced lawyers couldn't save him from the mountain of his own words. But victory felt different than she had imagined. There was no elation, no triumphant joy. There was only a quiet, profound sense of release, and a deep, lingering sorrow. Sorrow for Lily, the childhood friend whose memory had been so cruelly twisted. Sorrow for the good the Foundation could have done, and a strange, vestigial pity for Julian, a man so consumed by his grief that it had metastasized into a 25-year obsession, rotting him from the inside out. She thought often about her choice not to expose Senator Thorne. It had been an act of strategic mercy, a recognition that some truths cause more destruction than they are worth. In the weeks that followed, a piece of legislation that Thorne had been blocking, a bill to increase funding, and oversight for the foster care system, was suddenly and inexplicably pushed through the Senate with his full support. There was no public acknowledgement, no communication between them. There didn't need to be. It was a silent, anonymous act of penance. And for Alara, it was a more meaningful form of justice than public ruin would have been. Her name was cleared, her reputation restored. But Alara knew she could never go back. The gilded cage of that world no longer held any appeal. She had seen its rotten core, and she wanted something real, something she could build with her own hands, on her own terms. She won a significant settlement from the dissolving Croft Foundation, a quiet acknowledgement of the immense damage done to her. It was more money than she could ever need. 6 months later, the noise had faded. The world had moved on to its next scandal. Alara stood not in a polished boardroom, but in a dusty, cavernous space in the same rough neighborhood where she had first found her footing after the fall. Sunlight streamed through large, industrial windows, illuminating particles of dust dancing in the air. The room smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. She was using her settlement to convert the old warehouse into the Vance Institute, a non-profit dedicated to mentoring and empowering at-risk youth, particularly those aging out of the foster system. She was giving them what she had never had: a stable foundation, a network of support, and the strategic skills to navigate a world that was not designed for them to succeed. It was a new kind of power, not wielded in the silent, sterile battlefields of corporate warfare, but in the noisy, hopeful, and messy work of building futures. On the day the Institute was set to open, a small, unmarked package arrived at her office. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was childish, looping, and familiar. It was Lily Croft's diary. She didn't know who had sent it. Maybe a guilt-ridden family member. Maybe the old Croft servant Ben had found. It didn't matter. She sat down at her new desk, the sounds of construction and laughter from the next room a gentle backdrop, and began to read. The diary was filled with the simple, innocent thoughts of a 12-year-old girl, thoughts on school, on her family, on her dreams. And on nearly every page, her own name appeared. Alara taught me how to skip stones today. Alara isn't afraid of anything. I wish I could be brave like her. She turned to the final entry, dated the morning of the accident. Today we're going to climb the big oak tree behind the lake. I'm a little scared, but I won't be when I'm with Alara. She makes me feel safe. She's my best friend. A single tear tracked a clean path through the fine layer of dust on Alara's cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or of grief, but of absolution. The guilt she had carried. The quiet, secret fear that maybe, somehow, she had been responsible. Washed away, in Lily's own words. She was not the cause of her fear, but the source of her courage. She closed the diary, holding it to her chest. She had fought for her name, for justice, for the truth. She had dismantled an empire and faced down the ghosts of her past. But it was this final, small gift, this whisper from a lost friend, that gave her the one thing her brilliant strategies and cold fury never could piece. Her journey was not about revenge. It was about reclamation. And here, in this place of new beginnings, surrounded by the promise of futures she would help to build, Alara Vance was finally, completely, whole.